welcome to the Life Leadership Podcast with me, Leila Singh. This is the place where ambitious business professionals come to level up in their career and life. Here, we explore powerful strategies for leadership development. We dive into career and personal mastery, mental fitness, and building a standout personal brand. So if you're ready to play a bigger game and unlock your hidden potential to thrive in this fast evolving world of life and business, then you're in the right place. So let's dive in. In this latest episode of the Life Leadership Podcast, I am speaking with the lovely Anna Murray. Anna is the head of talent acquisition at the RS Group PLC. She's a seasoned talent acquisition leader with 20 years experience spanning both agency and in-house. She currently heads a TA team managing corporate functions, contract hiring, and executive recruitment. Anna has also led executive search teams in-house and brings a deep expertise of diversity and inclusion. In this episode, Anna shares with us the crucial step that 90% of applicants overlook when tailoring their CVs, why a simple tweak in the order of your CV's content could dramatically change how recruiters perceive your application, a counterintuitive tip for job seekers: embracing vulnerability on platforms such as LinkedIn can actually make you stand out from the crowd to recruiters and to hiring managers in a positive light, why traditional job applications are no longer enough, and how strategic networking can unlock opportunities that you didn't even know existed. And Anna's journey from feeling like an imposter to leading confidently, and her profound realization about authenticity when it comes to leadership. So let's head over and hear what Anna has to say. Anna, it's great to have you here today. Welcome to the Life Leadership Podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Really lovely to see you. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for agreeing to have a chat. I think there's a lot of golden nuggets that you can share with our audience today in terms of the job market and the conditions we're facing at the moment. So let's start with that. If you can dive into how you're seeing market conditions at the moment and the challenges that the people are facing.
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's an awful lot going on in the global economy at the moment, as we're all aware, and all of it has an impact on how we do business and ultimately vacancies that employers are putting out there. So I suppose to focus specifically on market conditions in terms of vacancy numbers at the moment, which is really broadly what we're talking about today. They're at a pretty low level at the moment. So it is tough for people that are seeking a new opportunity. We had the COVID years, sort of 2020, 2021, where vacancies really dipped to a really low level. They increased a bit in 22 and then have dropped ever since. So when I looked at the ONS statistics to the end of October, so looked at them this month, they go up to the end of last month, vacancy numbers in the UK dropped again, and they can continue to drop. So we don't see a sign at the moment of things leveling off or picking up. It's not all doom and gloom. There are still vacancies out there, and there will always be pockets where employers need particularly niche skills, certain tech skills, things like that will always be needed and in demand. But on the whole, at the moment, we need to recognise and people shouldn't feel disheartened when they find it tough, because vacancy numbers are down, and it's just a fact.
Okay. Yeah, not great news, I think, for people who are actually in the job market and aren't working at the moment. And it's interesting because, and this is a conversation I literally had yesterday, where somebody was talking to me about their perception of the kind of companies they should think about applying to. And the fact that you've got US companies, UK companies, and so forth, and she had a perception of what US companies could be like versus UK. And for me, I took that a step back and said, to your point, because we'd had the conversation recently, it's an economic downturn. There's a lot of global market conditions right now that are impacting business. So I guess what, in terms of outlook, would you say for next year? What can people expect? And I know you can't predict the future, but
I wish I could.
yeah, in your sort of 20 plus years experience, how do you think, or what can people kind of anticipate in the coming months? Because I guess Christmas is going to be typically a quiet
Yeah.
time.
Typically, yeah, Christmas is usually a bit quieter. Sometimes we always think it's going to be really quiet. There's always something urgent that crops up for recruiters, a desperate need that somebody has to hire somebody. But on the whole, things do dip a little bit over Christmas. And also as recruiters, we don't want to be calling somebody up while they're sat having a mince pie with their nan. You have to think about these things too. So things dip a little bit into 2025. It's hard to say, particularly if I focus on the UK primarily for the purpose of this discussion. We're seeing some real changes that Labour have proposed in their put in place in their budget, and those things I believe will impact in April next year. So things like the employer contributions to national insurance, the employee rights from day one that they will have, that I believe there'll be a bit of a probationary period, but employees don't necessarily have those rights from day one at the moment. So there's a couple of quite big changes that will potentially impact the job market as people look at actually who they're going to employ, where they're going to employ people, how they're going to do it. There's maybe some thoughts around, will there be a shift to more of a contingent workforce as people look to hire people that maybe there has a bit more flexibility around it with the contingent workforce, and also with those rights that people have from day one, that you're not so impacted on that with a contingent workforce. So there's a few schools of thought around it. Difficult to say when vacancies will pick up. I'm sure at some point the tide will turn. It's inevitable. We see this sort of up and down all the time. At some point, undoubtedly, that they'll start to creep back up again. When that will be, I'm not sure, because with this uncertainty and then what's going to happen in April, will businesses proceed with caution until then? Quite possibly, as they look to consider how they're going to absorb the impact of some of these changes.
Yeah.
I imagine there'll be some caution as we go into next year.
Okay. And I guess things like interest rates, consumer spending down, all of that is playing a part in this.
Yeah, definitely on companies' outlook generally. Yeah, all of it.
Great. Okay. So tell me, when it comes to the SMEs, let's say, versus the global organizations, when it comes to hiring and given the environment you have just described, what should candidates consider if they're thinking about the kind of organization to approach based on this? Are there pros and cons here for the size of company you would consider with the current conditions? Or
I don't think necessarily just size of company would come into it, because different industries are impacted differently as well. And it depends on the types of roles as well that organizations are hiring. So I've mentioned earlier, there'll always be some need for some really niche technical capability. That's inevitable. Things that perhaps are, as I said, more niche skills that will always be in high demand. So I think, I don't know it necessarily would make a huge difference on purely the size of the organization or whether they're global or not. I would think there are a lot more factors that play into it. So there's a lot to consider.
Okay. So given all of that and the fact that there are a lot of people in the job market at the moment, how are recruiters handling that? What's the impact on them?
Yeah, there's quite a big impact on recruiters at the moment, as you can imagine. Things change and it changes for recruiters too. We're desperately trying to find people and we've got more roles than candidates, or it turns around and it's the other way around. So as an example, we are experiencing record high numbers of applications, I would say, at the moment. We can post a role and have anything between 100 and 500 applications.
Goodness me.
So it's worth people who are job seekers being aware of that, because it might just change how they think about positioning themselves and putting themselves forward. Because if you think about the recruiter that has 500 applications to look at, even if you're thinking about 5 minutes of screen of a CV, go in, have a look at the CV, look at the cover letter, look at any application specific questions that might have been asked as part of the process. 5 minutes isn't really very much to do all of that. And even if they're doing 5 minutes to CV, that's over 41.5 hours of back-to-back screening of those CVs with no breaks. So it's a pretty relentless task. So how somebody pitches themselves in that application is more important than ever before.
Okay. And we'll go into that shortly, because I think there's a lot you can share here of value in terms of what you've seen as mistakes or what people can overlook, or just simply maybe haven't even considered before. So you've got vast experience in talent acquisition. So what can candidates do to stand out, would you say, in a fiercely competitive market?
I would say, first and foremost, really think about amending your CV for each application.
Okay.
You know, I think when you're job searching, to some degree, it can become a full-time job in itself. There's a lot you actually need to put into it. It's not as easy as just dusting off a CV and using it for multiple applications.
Yeah.
And just because you have a certain job title or have done a certain role, and you know you've got the experience to do the role you're applying to, the recruiter doesn't know that. So you really need to go through the advertisement, thinking about the essential skills and criteria they're looking for in that role, and make sure that is absolutely highlighted on your CV. If you've got the experience that advert is asking for, make sure it's on your CV. Don't just assume somebody knows you have that experience. So absolutely call it out. I would also say, when you think back to that recruiter looking through their 500 CVs, going through every one, they want to do that as quickly as they can. Of course they do. They want to get to their shortlist of perfect candidates as quickly and as easily as possible. So if your most relevant experience doesn't smack them in the face on page 1 on your CV, pretty much you've probably had it. So you really do need to make sure your most recent experience is on page 1. I've seen some CVs where the first page is lots of background information or personal statements. And while all of that stuff's great, what the recruiter wants to see is, do you have the relevant skills and experience to do this job? Maybe include a statement at the top about what it is you're looking for, why you're interested in that role, but also make sure, as I said, the most recent relevant experience you've got is on page 1, because sometimes people won't scroll down to page 2 or 3 or even 4. So that's really important.
Can I just, sorry to interject there, can I just ask, with the relevant experience on page 1, because I know you see a lot of CVs where people have got a kind of executive summary at the top, as a paragraph or so, would the relevant experience be within that, or should it be a separate section?
I would probably a little bit of both, and a personal statement at the top, absolutely fine. Usually I would keep those pretty brief. That's not going to fill more than maybe 4 or 5 lines at most. It really is a summary. And sometimes actually including in there what you're looking for. What is it you want to do next? Because it's all well and good what you've done, but what do you want to do next? That can be quite good, so people can see that you're really targeting this type of role, you want this opportunity. Yeah. And then your most recent experience with the relevant skills and experience. I would say maybe if you're looking at something where your relevant experience for the role you're applying to maybe was a little bit older, it might not necessarily be in your most recent role, but that's when you may then want to embellish more on that personal statement or put a bit more at the top to call out the relevant experience that you have to refer people to. It's just thinking about, again, that being one of a number of CVs that somebody is literally going to sift through, making sure your experience is just called out on that front page is really important.
Got it. And just for my curiosity, what percentage of people would you say actually personalize CVs for a specific job versus just they take a standard CV? And
I think that's interesting you say about taking a standard CV with the use of AI. It's interesting when you see very similar CVs arriving, almost word perfect, the same. I would say even if you're using a template, that's fine, but personalize it, tailor it. Use AI as your starting point, maybe get some ideas, but absolutely personalize this to what you've done and make it your own, because otherwise, if somebody receives more than one CV and they're identical, that will instantly be a red flag.
Right. Got it.
But yeah, I would say most people probably, I would have thought most people probably don't tailor their CV exactly for every single role. So actually, I think it probably is quite a good way to stand out from the crowd. And even if you've written a cover letter, which is a really good practice to do, Some people will do that to put in the specifics of why they're right for that specific role.
Yeah.
The cover letter won't necessarily always be opened and read at the screening stage.
Okay.
So if you think about those 500 CVs, recruiters in any organisation, as I say, they're looking for the quickest way they can get to that short list of good candidates. They just want to know, have you got the experience? They'll read the cover letter if they think the experience looks good, but usually it's the CV they'll look at first.
So you want that specificity to be somewhere in that CV at the top somewhere.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely. Yeah, really important.
Okay.
And then in addition to that, the CV is really important. It is the thing that you're using to apply, but also I would say think about your personal brand as well and how you come across. For most people, that's probably as simple as a LinkedIn presence, the obvious platform to use, but just making sure that's up to date. A lot of recruiters, once they're getting down to their shortlist, and actually hiring managers as well have been known to do it, to go and actually look at a LinkedIn profile alongside the CV, because sometimes it brings it to life a bit, shows you some other things about that person. There are references on there that people write about each other. They can see a little bit more into what that person's about. So do make sure it's up to date, and make sure that it matches your CV. The key dates match, everything aligns. And also, I would say with your LinkedIn profile, while you're updating it, make sure that you've included the skills and experience from the drop downs that LinkedIn has, because these are things that recruiters will use to search. Not all roles are always advertised because of the high volume of applications. Sometimes it might be a headhunt approach that a recruiter's looking to do. They might be looking at searching, seeking people, headhunting, and you want your profile to be easily found for the roles that are relevant for you. Really make sure that your LinkedIn profile is up to date.
Okay. Yeah, great advice already here. This is gold for people. And what about commenting? Because some people ask me about, should I spend time commenting on other people's posts? And I get that from a business owner point of view, but as an employee in the job market, what are your thoughts?
I think absolutely. I think comment on relevant posts and updates. Again, it just means that you're being seen. The other thing that people ask a lot is whether people should use the green open to work banner.
Yeah.
Which is, there's a lot of thoughts both ways on this. Now, my view is absolutely use it. As a recruiter, if I see somebody's got the open to work banner, I'm much more likely to approach that person versus someone who hasn't. Because again, recruiters are probably looking for the easiest, quickest route to getting the best candidates. If I've got a pool of people open to work who are more likely to reply to me and be interested, I'm going to go to those ones first.
Okay.
The other thing I would say is, with that in mind, put yourself out there, write posts, don't be afraid to. There's a really good TED talk that I'd highly recommend by a lady called Brené Brown. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's worth watching.
Which one is that?
It's all about vulnerability.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, really good. And this really resonated with me when I was thinking about people using their green open to work banner and putting posts saying, I'm finding it hard at the moment. I was made redundant. I'm really looking. I'm getting rejected. Has anybody got any of these types of roles? What Brené Brown says in this TED talk is vulnerability isn't weakness. And that's what people perceive it to be. It really isn't. It's absolutely courage. So when you see these people putting these posts out there, it's courageous to do that. And as a recruiter, when I see those posts, I am much more likely to go and read them, to look. And there's been a couple, actually, I think even this week, where I've seen those sorts of posts. I've clicked on the profile and I've been thinking about, have we got any roles at the moment that we're hiring that this person could be suitable for? Because I want to help this person. They're really courageous in what they're doing. They're putting themselves out there. This is the sort of person that I would want to support, and we would want to potentially offer a job to if we had the right opportunity and the right fit. Yeah. So I don't think people should have any concerns about being open about their open to work status.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I'm curious on that when it comes to like how advanced you are in your career, let's say. would you say what you've just shared there about having that banner on is specific to any particular kind of stage of your career, or is it across the board?
I think it's across the board, quite honestly. I don't think there's any shame in it at any level. There certainly shouldn't be.
Mm.
And actually, if it means that you're more likely to get found in a search by a recruiter, tapped on the shoulder, headhunted, approached, why wouldn't you do it? I think historically maybe there was a bit of a stigma around perhaps gaps in employment or people who have been out of work. I think in this current climate, and certainly since COVID, that has really fallen away. People understand that it has been tough, that there are people with gaps in their employment and that have been struggling and finding it very difficult to find the right opportunity. And that's absolutely fine. This could happen to anybody. So it's actually being open about it. I think people really shouldn't be concerned about.
Yeah, no, I completely get it. And I can see why for some people, I think it can be a pride element, not wanting other people to know. And it's almost, okay, let's take a step back and ask yourself what's really important here. Is it about people's opinions? Because people always have an opinion anyway, whatever you do, or is it about putting yourself out there, as you said, having the courage to do that so that you have a greater potential of being more visible, but getting approached as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned earlier about personal branding and the online aspects of having that LinkedIn presence as an example. And something I advocate a lot for is personal branding, another aspect of it, which is how you show up in person, because I feel there's a different facets of personal branding. You've got the way your style, the way that you dress, you've got your online presence, the kind of what you're known for, the content you post, the followers, all of that. Then actually, how do you show up in person? And from my point of view, I see it as we can pay someone to write a CV for us. We can pay somebody to write your LinkedIn profile, but actually to secure that role, it's how do you show up in person or on your Zoom or Teams interview and come across to the interviewer. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and actually you make a really good point there. A lot of meetings are still happening online. And it's very different, actually, how you're going to present yourself perhaps on an online meeting or interview versus in person.
Absolutely.
It's much, much more difficult on a Teams or a Zoom interview to actually build that rapport. So if you think back to pre-COVID, cast our minds back, when we used to all go into an office for an interview, you were greeted at reception. You'd have the small talk as you go into the lift, go to get a coffee, you chit chat about the weather. The person feels like they get to know you a little bit and you perhaps relax a little bit with them as well. And you build that rapport. It's quite common with the online meetings, literally for them just to start and to not have any of that rapport building. So it is quite difficult. So I suppose trying to bring little bits of yourself as well into that interview throughout it's challenging. And we do aim to help our hiring managers with some guidance and advice beforehand, saying, look, it is a bit different. Try and build a bit of rapport at the start. Not all hiring managers will do that necessarily, or interviewers. So I think it's just thinking on those online meetings, how you bring yourself into some of your answers as well, because you don't get that opportunity at the start. So it's hard. And then there's all the usual things online, making sure you've tested the tech beforehand, get the right lighting, make sure you're not going to have any interruptions, all those sorts of things that could really throw you. In person, there's some different things to think about. And what I would say that people often don't think about, they're so focused on the interview itself once they're sat in that interview room. What they're not thinking about is the interview really starts the minute you walk into that building, potentially, and it lasts until the minute you leave. I have heard stories where some interviewers will go and talk to the receptionist after the interview and ask them how they found that individual. What did they think of them? And how you spoke to that receptionist is really important. Were you dismissive? Were you friendly? How did you come across to them? That's actually an important thing when people are deciding, is this person right for our organisation? And think about right through to out the other side of that interview when the interviewer says, oh, I'd like you to just grab a coffee with so-and-so in the team. They would be a peer, 10, 15 minutes, grab a coffee, have a chat with them, get the true story of what it's like here. You want to bring yourself, so I wouldn't say completely don't ever drop your guard or don't be you, but recognize that is still absolutely part of the interview. So you do want to just consider that and make sure that you are in interview mode the whole time.
Yeah, invaluable piece of advice there. And it makes me think about saying the first impressions are in the first 7 seconds, right? And one of the things I talk about a lot is the fact that, and this is from conversations I've had as people often talk about, oh, I need to make a good impression by what I say. And actually, when it comes to communication, what we say is only 7%.
Yeah.
And 55% is body language. And all of that is that 7 seconds first impression, as you say, when you walk into reception or when you walk into the meeting room. So how are you carrying yourself? Are you smiling, making eye contact, all of those kinds of little things that can make the difference with building that connection and building that rapport.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I actually heard somebody talk recently about a meeting that they had with a candidate that was online, and all they could see was the top of the person's head because the candidate just hadn't positioned themselves. And you think, we've been doing sort of online meetings for such a long time now, and it actually didn't create a great impression. As you said, despite what they might have said in that interview, they didn't create that brilliant first impression, and that was taken into account as part of the overall summary. It's those impressions do matter.
Absolutely. And what, if anything, would you say people tend to overlook when it comes to that interview process? So whether it is face to face, besides setting up the camera properly, obviously, what else might there be, or what experiences have you witnessed?
Quite a mixture, quite a range over the years, from people who didn't even really know why they were there or what they were interviewing for, right through to people who have prepared everything. So there's quite a mixture in between. I think assuming that the interviewer won't ask anything about the organisation, you've got to do your research. It's basic. You can't just walk in and expect to not know anything about the company or the role. It's pretty standard, but research the company, know what their values are, know what they stand for, know a little bit about their ERG policies and all these sorts of things that are really interesting. And maybe when you're looking at all of that, make some notes of things that resonate with you. What do you really like about that? And try and bring that into the interview, even if you're not asked about it, to show that you've done that research. If, for example, you're interviewing for an organisation that has retail outlets, go and visit one of them. If you're interviewing for a company that sells certain products, taste them, test them, buy them. It just make sure you've done your research and really understand the company and the role as well. You should have a copy of a role description, go through it, make sure you understand it, and always have questions ready to ask. It shows almost a lack of interest is how it comes across if people don't have any questions to ask during an interview. So always think of something that you want to ask about, want to know more about, and there's always something if you really think about it. So always be prepared. I think preparation is the key.
Yeah, I think that's where I was heading in my thought process. As you were sharing that, it's all about the preparation, the research, the questions, planning ahead. And with the questions, is it okay to write them down or have them on a note on the phone or something? Or is it better to be able to have them in your head?
The questions that you want to ask?
Yeah, as a candidate,
Absolutely fine. I think it's absolutely fine to go in, even if you want to bring some notes to refer to. Not everybody can memorize facts and figures and things they want to present. So if you're going into an interview, there's no reason why you can't or shouldn't be able to have if you want to have a notebook with some key points you want to make. Actually, it shows you've prepared. I would certainly have no issue with that, with somebody doing that. And if you want to have some key questions jotted down, things you want to ask, anything like that should be absolutely fine. But I think if you're in any way concerned about whether the interviewers might react badly, just check in advance. with the recruiter, speak to the contact or whoever scheduled that interview for you and just ask them if it would be okay. And I'd be surprised if it was or was an issue. I think the only thing people have a concern about is when candidates are on, again, it comes back to Teams meetings, Zoom meetings, and they might be using AI in the background to answer questions. And that is something we've heard is going on.
I hadn't even thought of that one.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't advocate for that. I think it's one thing to use the AI, use the tools to help you prepare and get ready. But I think plugging in questions as they come up and reading them off of AI is not great practice. And ultimately it will get found out anyway.
Yeah, I think it'd be quite hard to do that and stay focused on camera. And how do you even do that?
Quite incredible. Yeah.
And so tell me, what are some of the common mistakes that you've come across when it comes to the job search?
I think things that people forget to do would be overlooking utilizing networking. It's really important. Just using your own network. People, again, LinkedIn's a great one for a broader network of people. But just, people networking around, asking people for support. I think I wouldn't just restrict a job search to submitting applications to advertise roles, and that's the end of it. Networking is a huge part of that. And even if you apply to a specific role of a company and you don't know anybody there, you can look people up on LinkedIn. You can have a look at their backgrounds, have a look at maybe how they've got into their roles. You can see posts they're putting about the company, what life's like there. And actually you can build up quite a good picture just through doing some of this, maybe connect with some people as well. So I think networking is something that can often be forgotten about as a really good opportunity. And then I think the thing that people often forget to do is the tailoring of the CV and making sure it's clear, it's concise, and that critical information hits recruiters as soon as they open it.
Okay. With the CV, is it still the whole kind of, it needs to be 2 pages? Back in my day, very early on, it was like, that's it, no more than 2 pages. Is that still the case? Or
quite a common question, actually, that I get asked on that. I would say it depends on your experience and what you want to show. I certainly wouldn't say you have to restrict it to 2 pages. If you have enough experience to showcase that it goes on to 3.5, 4, I mean, it really matters. The critical bit is that grabbing on page 1, that really critical piece. So I absolutely wouldn't worry. I do think what I would consider, though, is if the CV was getting longer, so you've built up a lot of experience over a few years, you might want to look back at your earlier career history and maybe just limit some of the things that you're saying. So as that experience perhaps becomes less relevant, what it is you want to do next, instead of including, say, 10 bullet points for your first ever role, you might just want to condense that down to 1 or 2, just an overview of what you did, and then flesh out the more recent experience that's going to get you that next job and that next opportunity. And that can really help with condensing it down a bit. But I think I honestly wouldn't be concerned. It wouldn't go against somebody if a CV went over more than 2 pages.
Okay, good to know. And just touching back on what you said about networking being overlooked, again, a topic that I talk about a lot, the power in building relationships, cultivating them, nurturing them. And I've had people reach out, or can you recommend me to such and such a company or person because I need a job, without any introduction, anything. And I think there's something to be said for cultivate the relationship first, number one. And number two, something I was having a conversation earlier today about with an individual is, if you are looking for a favor from someone, because people like to help, this is my view, so I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this. But my experience is people like to help. As you said, if you see someone who's got open to what you're going, you'll think about, is there something we can help them with? But I also feel there's an element of put some effort in yourself first. In other words, have spent some time on your LinkedIn profile, have a good CV that you can see you've invested a bit of time and effort in, do a bit of due diligence on the company or the role and so forth, before you approach people to ask for help. rather than putting it all onto other people to say, oh, I need you to help me to get a job.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Absolutely. I think also if you're reaching out to somebody looking for help, people want to help, but what's in it for that person to do that? If they don't know who you are, why would they? And also, if they don't know you or know anything about you, are they actually going to put their personal brand on the line to recommend you to somebody they know if they don't know if
100%.
you're any good or not? And
Exactly. It's a
very
reputation
challenging.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've not been on the receiving end of that myself, being asked to do that. I think when people are networking, they need to think about not necessarily doing like the blindly messaging somebody like that, getting them to, because they've got a connection, but perhaps thinking about how they can connect in directly with the organisations they want to work for and the individuals there, perhaps to build up a picture of what life's like there.
Yeah, I agree. And just circling back to the preparation and the due diligence beforehand, something I always advocate for my clients to do is to do a little bit of a research. I mean, we've got all these tools at our fingertips, but go on LinkedIn, and if you're getting an interview at company A, go and look at who you might be connected with, who now happens to be working there. Go have a conversation, find out about their experience and what the culture's like, and so whatever's important for them. And not only that, also if you've got the names of the people within the company who are hiring or who you're going to be interviewed by, again, are there connections there? Is some mutual connection? So again, the building rapport at the interview is like, oh, I see that you know so and so, you've worked with so and so before, and I think it just adds a lot of sort of brownie points to building that relationship.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I would always recommend connecting with or certainly looking at the profiles of interviewers that you're about to be interviewed by. That's a really good tip for sure. We do tend to, in all of our invites, include the LinkedIn profiles for our interviewers. So candidates can do that. They can easily find people, have a look. I think long gone are the days where we used to have these sort of Word documents of bios about people. We don't have that anymore. It's all about LinkedIn profile. But absolutely, look people up. And also, like you say, have a look at their background and see if there's any rapport you can build that way.
Yeah, exactly. 100% agree. Okay, so I know we've touched on the CV already. Is there anything else on that? For example, I know I see people who have their hobbies, their interests at the end. Is that even something people will look at, given what you said about the volume of CVs and the first page, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so there's a couple of other things I'd say about CV. So yeah, on hobbies, it's something that historically we were all told with our first CV we were creating, put your hobbies on, and you'd have endless CVs with, oh, I like reading and socializing with friends. And that's lovely. But as a recruiter, I don't need to read that 500 times over. So I would say, unless you've got something that makes you stand out, that's different. I've seen some where people have applied to roles and they've got a hobby section and they do a lot of charitable work or in their spare time, something that makes them perhaps a little bit different or anything like that you do, lovely. I would absolutely include it. It shows, it differentiates you and what you do. I think if there isn't really anything like that, don't include it just for the sake of it. It just adds to those pages and pages of CV that we don't need. We can cut some of that out. And nobody is not going to progress you for a role because you don't have on there that you like reading and socializing with friends. I would leave those things off.
Okay. And what else?
Yeah, while we're thinking about CVs and the length and all of that, I would also call out the formatting of a CV. That's really important to consider. So if you're going for maybe a graphic design position, you might want to include something a bit more designed. Niche market for that though, but to show some of your skills, perhaps you might want to do that, and that's fine, that makes sense. I think on the whole, I would keep it fairly simple. Avoid paragraphs of information. I have seen some CVs in the past where people will list their experience, or I suppose they won't list it, they'll put it under the header of their experience, where they've worked, what their job was, and they'll write it in paragraphs. Again, think back to the recruiter with their 1 to 500 CVs, trying to decipher, has this person got the skills, the top 3-4 skills I need them to be able to do to impress my hiring manager to get this job filled? It's a nightmare. You can't decipher that easily. So it sounds obvious, really clear, structured bullet points. Really important. Just make it really easy to read and fairly succinct. You want to put the information on there, but keep it fairly succinct. So definitely think about that and just make it easy for the recruiters to instantly, at a glance, see the information.
Okay.
And when you're writing those bullet points, or when you're going back and reviewing your CV, one of the things I learned many years ago was something that was referred to me as the so what factor. So when you're going through your CV, look at the things that you've written and think about what this tells the future employer that you want to hire you about what you've achieved. So what? If I say on my CV, there's a bullet point that says, I was responsible for sales and account management. So what? It doesn't mean I was any good at it. It doesn't show anybody what I've delivered or what I've actually done. Whereas if we actually embellish that slightly and say, I was responsible for sales and account management, I delivered X% sales uplift within my first year due to implementing XYZ, whatever it is. Suddenly it shows what you've achieved, the quantifiable business benefits, which is hugely important. An employer's looking at, why should I hire you? What are you going to bring to my organisation? What are you going to achieve for us? And they're looking at your track record. So include quantifiable things, ideally, that show in any role what the benefit is that you've achieved. There will always be a benefit for that company that you're seeking to achieve, whatever your role is, and include it, and include as many facts and figures as you can, because that instantly then shows me, again, when I'm scrolling through, when I'm looking at those bullet points on page 1 of your CV, not only what you've achieved, but what business benefit it was and what it resulted in.
Okay, I think that's a great tip. Sorry, you're going to say.
Yeah, I was just going to say, those are the things I'm looking for. So I would go through literally every bullet point on your CV and almost just say to yourself, what does that tell somebody? What do they learn from that? Does it really tell them anything? And tweak it.
And I guess also to your point at the very start about tailoring CVs, is this even relevant to the job I'm applying for?
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's something that you think might be a benefit, but perhaps they're not calling out, they want, shift those things to the top of the list that they're really calling out that they're looking for, move some of the other things underneath. If you think they might be of interest, but perhaps less relevant, again, it can make a difference. I saw something once, which just reminded me actually, about the psychology of how we look at and read things. And I was at a conference, and on the projector, they put up 2 CVs. It was just a bullet point list of experience, 2 CVs. And before that, they told us this is the role they're applying to. Which CV is better for the role, A or B? And I proudly put my hand up, as everyone else in the room did. Oh, definitely, it's CVA, 100% CVA. Then they went on to the next slide. And what was really interesting, both CVs had exactly the same list, exactly the same. It was just in a different order.
Really?
Yeah. Incredible. Completely blew my mind.
So what was that? Was it, to your earlier point then, is it that the relevant things for that job spec were at the top? Is that what it?
Yeah. Put the relevant things at the top, the first things you want to see at the top of that list. Really important. But that's the difference it can make. And you, even as somebody looking at that, we didn't realise that, like, the impact it can have. Really interesting.
And on the back of that, or following on from that, I remember very early on when I had graduated and I was applying for roles. This was back then when we had to fill in a paper application form and stick it in an envelope and post it. I was told because people, even back then, it was like, people are going to be scanning this. You've got to have those keywords in there. So is that something to think about as well, would you say, when writing your CV?
Oh, definitely.
It's the way you say things, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the way you say things, definitely the keywords that you use. And when you're applying to jobs as well, remember that you're going into an employer's database, essentially. They'll use an applicant tracking system that you'll apply into. You'll sign up to privacy policies and it will all be managed, and there'll be data purging rules. But for a period of time that you've signed up to, you will sit in that database unless you request otherwise. What the recruiters can do within that company also is search on the CV. So if in a few months' time another role comes up,
Mhm.
that maybe you're suitable for. If you've got certain keywords on your CV, a recruiter might just search and find you in that database as well. So yeah, I would say the keywords really important.
That's a really good tip, because then if you think
Mm.
there's now 499 applications they can go back and revisit instead of going back out to the market, you
Absolutely.
want yours
Yeah,
to jump out, don't you?
you do. And from a recruiter's
Mm.
perspective, these are candidates in the market who have shown an interest in the organisation. They're already
Mhm.
warm to your organisation. So you really want to be able to search on those people and tap them up if something else comes up.
Yeah. Okay. All very interesting, isn't it? How things have
Yeah.
evolved. Anything else to add to that, would you say, or?
The last thing really that people sometimes overlook is just contact information. Yeah, occasionally we will see a CV with no contact information. Now, when you're applying into an applicant tracking system, you're entering some of that information. But if your CV ever comes separated from that, you want
Yeah.
people to be able to contact you. So don't worry about dates of birth. You don't need to include any of that. But I would include just literally your name, your telephone number, your email address, and maybe just the town that you live in. You don't even need your full postal address or anything like that, but just the basics so that people can see which area you're in, where you can perhaps get to, and the basic contact information.
Okay. And this again is just for my curiosity, when it comes to responsibilities and accomplishments in your like the company that you're currently working for and your work experience as you go through, is it good to separate them and maybe have a few achievements first, highlighting those key things, and then the day-to-day responsibilities?
Yeah, everyone has their own style, and I don't think there's
Mm.
necessarily a strict right and wrong. There are some tips
Mhm.
and things to follow, which
Mm.
we've talked about today, but outside of that, you really want to bring your own style a little bit to it as well, and
Right.
how you feel comfortable doing it. Some people will merge the achievements within
Yeah.
the responsibility. So they'll talk about that as one, which is a bit like what we talked about earlier, the so what factor,
Yeah.
what have you achieved? And I think from my perspective, every single bullet point should show me what you've done, but what that also achieved. Otherwise, what's the point of including it?
Yeah.
If people want to call out some very specific achievements, there's absolutely no harm in doing that either, if you really
Mhm.
want to call something out and highlight it.
Okay. Thank you for that. And just moving slightly towards leadership now and then stepping into leadership. My coaching practice is all about supporting aspiring leaders. So people who want to step up to the next level, step into a leadership or executive position, and others become leadership ready. So from your experience, what can you share as a leader to our audience?
It's a good question. There's a few things, I suppose, that have happened as I've gone through my journey of managing people and then moving into the role I'm in today, leading a team here at RS. I would go back to start with my very first role as managing a recruitment team. So I'd been a couple of years at the organisation I worked for and looking after executive hiring. And for my development, my next promotion, I was told I needed to step into leading that team, managing the team. At the time, I didn't want to do it. And I think it was a bit of imposter syndrome. We all suffer from that or can suffer from it. And I thought, gosh, I can't do this. These people are my peers at the moment. A lot of them have been at this company longer than I have, and they might not be looking for the next step, perhaps. And I was. But so I was being told I needed to do this. And I was lucky enough at the time to have a coach for a few sessions who was actually training to be a coach. So was practicing on a few people. And one of the conversations I had with him was, I've been asked to do this and I'm not good enough to do it. I can't do this. I'm not ready. They're telling me I have to step into this role and I'm really worried about it. And one of the things he said that really resonated with me and was a bit of a turning point for me was, but why would they ask you to do it if they didn't think you could or didn't think you were good enough? And I thought, oh, I just hadn't thought of it like that. All I could think was my own inner voice saying, you're not good enough, you can't do it, you can't do it.
Yeah.
So I thought, actually, that's how maybe step outside, that's how other people are perceiving me, that I can do it and I am good enough. And I took the role on, did that, and I didn't have any previous line management experience, as nobody does in their first line management role. And I had a lot of respect for my manager at the time, and that was the most recent experience I'd had of of a manager, so I emulated a lot of how they were. Messages you need to pass on, and how you manage the team, and how you deal with anything you need to address, or review time, things like that. I was very much almost delivering things how she would, because that was the experience I've seen. I was mirroring that. And I found it quite uncomfortable, because it just wasn't a natural way to do things for me. And I can't remember exactly what the turning point was, but I decided I was going to deliver those messages, but I was going to do it with my style, in my way, how I felt comfortable doing it. And that was a massive turning point. And from that point, I grew in confidence. I got great feedback from my team. I felt like I was a much stronger leader of that team and manager of those people, because I was doing it in a way that was true to me, which I perhaps hadn't had the confidence to do up until that point. So it grew over time, that confidence. So those were a couple of points in my very early management. And then the other one that I still think about today, and crikey, I'm learning every day, all the time, about how to develop as a leader and a manager, and continually growing all the time. But one of the things that I reflect on, and still I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity, is when I worked at Capgemini. I went to their university in Les Fontaines, lovely French chateau where they do training courses, and
Nice.
a bit nervous about it. Yeah, I was a bit nervous, thinking, oh, am I good enough to go on this course? And what's this all about? It was about authentic leadership. It was a 3-day course. And whereas a lot of training courses, we sit there, we think, oh, it's really good, really enjoyed it, and then come home, stuff the materials in a drawer somewhere, forget about them, and move on with our lives, and really don't look back. On this particular course, we wrote a letter to our future selves, and I've still got that letter today. And we're probably talking, it must have been about 8 years ago I went on this course. It was incredible. And the big turning point, I think, for me, was that naturally, you look at any kind of psychology testing, any of the Myers-Briggs, I'm a massive introvert. Absolutely, complete introvert. That's how I am. And I was very proud of the fact that I separated who I was with my work life. So not necessarily even just my personal life or talking about things, but just I had a complete, almost a different, I'm in work, I'm professional. That's the Anna you get to know.
And at home, almost.
Yeah, almost a different kind of person I would bring to those two scenarios. And what I learned on this course was just how important it is to be seen as an authentic leader, to actually bring some of yourself to that, to allow people in, to let them get to know you. And I can actually remember going back into the office afterwards and bringing a bit of that, even just talking a bit more about what I might have done at the weekend, or about me. And you don't have to go into tons of detail or anything completely private, but just letting people in a bit, letting them get to know you. Again, I think just relaxed me more into this journey I was on of becoming the manager of people, or the leader that I wanted to be. So those were a couple of real turning points. So I think it's about, for me, realizing that how you see yourself isn't necessarily how other people see you.
Yeah.
Then they actually see someone who really does have those strengths and can do it. It's the gremlins in your own mind that you need to close off a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And being authentic and being true to yourself. That, I think, again, that's what's helped me feel comfortable in what I do, and be true to myself, and hopefully then my team feel like they know me authentically, and we get the best out of each other.
Yeah, again, I love everything you're sharing here, because I think it's so important. And if we're looking to move forward in our careers, these are things, bringing ourselves to work is what comes to mind. And I've seen a lot of articles and talks on this, particularly since COVID. And I think there's a lot to be said about allowing people in even just a little bit to get to know you. So it creates more of a real persona in how people can then, and again, it comes back to what we talked about, looking at what resonates if you're going to an interview. Similarly, in the workplace, there will always be something that might just resonate with people around you, and that just helps to nurture the relationships even more.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it really does. It certainly made a huge difference for me.
Yeah, great shares. Thank you so much, Anna, for taking time out today. I
Thank
really
you. I've
appreciate
really
it.
enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise, I think there's so much gold here in what you have shared, and a lot for what we spoke about at the start in terms of the challenges in the marketplace. I think what you've shared here is people could take this and just do what you have shared here in terms of their CV, their LinkedIn, how they're showing up, can really have them stand out over and above in that competitive market.
Hopefully, if we just help a few people just to stand
Yeah,
out, then brilliant.
absolutely. Thank you once again, and you take care. I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Leila. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already done so. And if you enjoyed and gained value from today's episode, then do please leave a review telling us your key learnings and what you enjoyed the most. And do please share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can spread the word on life leadership, creating a life of choice, freedom, and new possibilities. Connect with me directly on LinkedIn, and if you would like to learn more about how we can work together, either DM me on LinkedIn or email me. All details and resources can be found in the show notes.